Okay, so I haven't been modest with the title, the things you need to know. Hopefully we'll cover
Recording in
things,
progress.
but there's an awful lot of stuff to go through. So some of it may not be in as much detail as you would like. Some of it may be in more detail than is applicable to you. Apologies for that, but we can always come back to it later. So without further ado, we'll move on to the first slide. So the first one is the disclaimer. Everything we do these days, we have to deny all knowledge we did it, really. So we do not offer tax or other financial advice, and none of the information we share today should be taken as such. So we are not giving financial advice, we're giving information. Please seek appropriate advice if you need it. Now, the subject of tax advice is one that occupies us in the payroll industry. Are payroll professionals tax advisors or not? That's one for another day. So on to the next slide, please. So the agenda, the things I'm hoping to cover during the course of the next hour or so. Firstly, there'll be an overview, look at the things that have led to where we are. Before I do, though, please feel free at any time to raise your hand, put messages in the chat box, questions. We will hopefully stop a couple of times en route to our final destination, but if we don't, we'll pick them up at the end. So please, if anything piques your interest at any point in time, then do mention it. So we'll look at an overview, why we are where we are, what the budget was seeking to achieve, what it did achieve, what it didn't achieve. Tax, national insurance and student loans. So mostly dull, but ultimately, if we didn't cover it, then we could hardly call it a budget update. So there is some stuff in there. It's not the most exciting, but we'll cover it nonetheless. We'll cover wages, what's changed in terms of the pay that people receive, statutory payments, so parental pay and SSP, benefits, all types of benefits ranging from pensions through to benefits in kind, company cars, etc. So all things in between. Other things that don't quite fit in one of the categories I've currently looked at. And then questions. We'll always have some room for questions at the end. So we'll move on to the first slide, or second slide, or third slide. So an overview of this is definitely specific to 25, the one in November. And in terms of the payroll world, and probably the HR world too, in actual terms of what was in the budget, it was relatively quiet. And that's probably coming after the tumult of the previous budget, which was anything but quiet. So this felt like a quiet budget in terms of what we need to do in payroll and what we need to do in HR. However, the Employment Rights Bill has now received royal assent following ping pong across the houses. It finally received royal assent on the 18th of December. It will become law. So now that it is law, there will be lots and lots of other changes coming down the track. So we can brace ourselves for things that are going to affect our lives in either payroll or in HR. I've listed a few items there which are going to be impacted. There are many more. A few have fallen off the wagon as a result of the House of Lords saying no, or the government deciding that they weren't going to pursue it for whatever reason. But national minimum wage, statutory sick pay, parental leave review processes, flexible working, pregnancy and maternity rights, expansion of day one rights, 0 hours contracts, and workplace pensions reform are all in the wind at the moment. Either things have happened and further things will happen, or nothing's happened yet, but watch this space because it will. So tax, national insurance and student loans. So no changes to tax rates and tax bands for the rest of the UK at least. The Scottish budget is tomorrow, so they could do something that would be interesting. One suspects they probably won't. It would be a bit out of kilter with what everyone else has done. Tax allowances, so those of you who have been in payroll or HR for a period of time, in olden days, the 1257L and 12570 tax-free pay figures, they used to change on a year-by-year basis. They would rise meaning that people had more tax-free pay every year, because, ultimately, as income rises and cost of living rises, it's natural that you get more pay before you pay tax. But of course, that no longer happens. And certainly in the last 2-3 years, nothing has changed in terms of tax-free pay. Nothing is going to change until at least April 2031. So a period of stability in terms of what is actually happening to your tax pay, tax-free pay, and tax bands. So I put them there for the sake of completeness. You've got your basic rate of tax, which is, and I've immediately, no, that's fine. So basic rate of tax, 20% is payable on your first £37,700 of taxable pay, after taking into account your personal allowance and any other adjustments to your tax code. Higher rate tax, 40% payable on the band between £37,701 and £125,140, and the additional rate of 45% payable on earnings over £125,140. Sorry, taxable earnings above that figure. So next slide, please. So in addition to that, the rates and thresholds have all been frozen, with the exception of the lower earnings limit. So all other thresholds in relation to national insurance calculations, pension calculations, have remained unchanged. The only things that have changed are the lower earnings limit, which are the figures above which you must earn in order to get certain statutory payments. The employer's rate of NICs remains at 15%, and the employee rate remains at 8%. So gone are those, last 18 months or so ago when it was changing for a pastime. It's now fixed and not going to change, so that the government can say that the tax rates aren't changing. You'll still pay more tax, but it's done in a more subversive way. The 15% rate also applies to other classes of national insurance. So class 1A, which is payable on benefits in kind and termination payments, and class 1B, which is payable on PAYE settlement agreements. So those rates remain unchanged. Next slide, please. Student loans, how very thrilling these are. So we've got the introduction of a Plan 5 student loan this year. So that is as much as excitement as we get. The thresholds have changed. The rates have not changed. It's interesting to note that some of the thresholds are getting very close to the national minimum wage for a full-time worker. A full-time worker, if someone's working 40 hours a week, on the average, on the national minimum wage, then they're going to get about £26,500, give or take. So at some point, you used to look into the distance as a student, thinking you wouldn't be paying off your student loan for quite some time. Now, if you have a student loan and you're on the national minimum wage, you're getting exceptionally close to paying it. And if you have some overtime additional pay, then you're likely to make some contributions for the first time. So be prepared for the odd query if someone gets a bonus and sees a student loan that they'd forgotten they even had. They may see some student loan deductions appear. Remembering, of course, that if at the end of the year their earnings haven't crept above the threshold, then they can actually seek to recover that back through the student loan company. So if you make a repayment, because repayments of student loans through payroll are done on a week, 1 month, 1 basis, it means that you can earn £25,000, still pay some student loan, but on your annual earnings, you're not due to pay it. So if anyone does come with those type of queries, then certainly at the end of the year, they can go back and seek to recover the loan they have repaid. So the employment allowance, again, no changes to the employment allowance. It's always worth reiterating what the employment allowance is, though, because it's a allowance that has to be claimed every year. So historically, going back a few years, you would make a claim, it would continue until you notified HMRC that you weren't eligible to claim it any longer. That did change. And so now every year, part of year-end procedures, year start procedures, is to ensure that you make a declaration and that we claim the employment allowance if you are eligible to claim it. The employment allowance reduces employers' national insurance contributions by up to £10,500. So for a large employer, it's a drop in the ocean. It's all done and dusted in month one. However, if you're a smaller employer, you may continue to see that for as many months as it will last. So some employers will see it throughout the year. Some it'll end in months 5, month 6, month 7, and they'll suddenly see HMRC liabilities that increase, and they will inevitably wonder why. So that is the reason why. Last year, the pound cap on eligibility was removed. So prior to that, if an employer's national insurance liabilities were above £100,000, then they were not eligible to claim the allowance. That changed last year, which is the point in time when we asked people to declare their eligibility or non-eligibility. So we required a return regardless of whether a claim was being made or not being made. Because there was an awful lot of people who just didn't realise that that cap that had been there for 5 or 6 years had disappeared. They hadn't been eligible, and now they were. So those generally go out mid-March onwards. We send out an email with all the information that you need to make a considered judgment and let us know whether you consider yourself eligible or not. And we ask for 100% return of those. So we do remind people periodically until it feels that it's no longer worth the energy. But from our point of view, from your point of view, it's an important tick in an audit box. Your auditor may ask you, have you claimed it? Have you not? And yeah, for us, clearly, we're making claims on your behalf. We need to have some some evidence to back that up. Other eligibility criteria remain unchanged, and on the next slide we'll see what those things that you're probably going to be looking out for are. So this is a greatest hits version of what you will be asked to look at, what you need to consider. The things you need to consider are you part of a group of charities or companies? So it's an important one. It's the one that is most taxing for some. What constitutes a group? When is a business connected to another business? Because the employment allowance can only be claimed by one company in the group. And it's important in some cases that the right company claims it. We certainly see situations where the wrong company in a group of entities has made the claim. And because of that, maybe that part of the group didn't have enough employers' national insurance to fully benefit from the £10,500 recoverable. So it is important. We are not able to advise you on whether or not you are connected to other businesses. It's very much akin to the connection rules in relation to corporation tax. We'll possibly refer you to your accountant or business advisor because they will have information that we're not party to. So we're not trying to be evasive. We are trying to put it in the hands of the person who is best able to make that judgment. If you're a single entity, you're a sole director, you have other employees in the business, then it's very likely that you can claim, and that includes charities. But if life is more complicated, then other considerations you do need to look at. So do you have more than one PAYE scheme? So you may be one charity, and you may have more than one PAYE scheme. Traditionally, charities very often had a trading entity and a trust entity, for whatever reason, to ensure that things were dealt with in the right way. The trading entity would, do as its name suggests, trade, make a profit, whatever. And you'd have the trust entity that was predominantly that body or the entity that received the funding. And internally, there might be cross transfers of income from one to the other. But you could only make the claim against one of those entities. So whatever the reasons are for having more than one PAYE scheme, it's important that you only make one claim for the organization as a whole, the charity as a whole. Director only. Are you a director only payroll? Don't have many of those, but you have to have at least 2 directors or other employees liable for secondary class 1 national insurance. So employers' national insurance. So 2 people who earn more than £12,500 per year. If you don't, and you're fine with a director and an employee if the employee earns over that threshold, but 2 directors who earn below that threshold would not be eligible, even though because of the disparity between the thresholds in employees and employers' national insurance, they would be paying employers' national insurance, but would not be able to claim it if they didn't fit that criteria. And doing more than half of your work in the public sector. If the majority of your business is with the public sector, you cannot claim. The majority mean more than 50%. We've certainly come across circumstances where the belief of the business is that they are substantially below 50% dealing with the public sector, and HMRC, through whatever means they may have available, believe that more than 50% of the business is being done in the public sector, and that leads to difficulties and a certain amount of ironing out and conversations that need to be had. But hopefully in most cases it's fairly clear, but you definitely need to look at it. And when we send out the declarations, we send out links and information that you can refer to, giving more detail on exactly what that means. This is, a one sentence trying to say a lot of stuff. But the key takeaway is that you need to review the email, check the links you need to check, make sure that you are eligible or not eligible, and declare it accordingly. We will then make the claims. So on to the next slide, please. Wages, national minimum wage and national living wage rates from April 2026. So this is just a quick look at the rates that are in place currently, the rates that will be in place from April the 1st, remembering that the new rates apply for pay periods starting on or after April the 1st. So depending what your pay period is, will determine which month you have to comply with the legislation. Most people, to avoid confusion, but potential staff discontent, will, if it's your April payroll, they'll apply the pay rate for April. Some may split it down into 2 pay rates so that rather than looking at the pay period, they're looking at the 1st of April as a date and saying anything worked after that, we're going to pay at the new rate. So we may occasionally ask the question how you want to apply the rate, because it's, if you pay from the 1st to the 31st of the month is all clear cut, no questions. If you pay from the 20th to the 19th, then that question needs to be asked and answered. Not as horrific as it was this time last year in terms of percentage increases, but the 4.1% increase for people over 21 is certainly, in our experience of the payrolls we deal with, at or marginally above the average increases we see. So if we see cost of living increases, they're generally below that figure. 18 to 20-year-olds, 8.5% increase from £10 to £10.85. I can confidently say that outstrips most employers offering in terms of an annual incremental increase. 16 and 17-year-olds and apprentices, 6%. So yeah, they're not insignificant. Once again, the gap between the young and the more mature is closing. So, a youngster with very little experience in your business is going to be commanding similar figures to someone who has a lot of experience in your business, which can create difficulties, as we all know. Increases, 4.1% increases, or if you average it, there's a lot of young workers out there, so it could be higher than that. It's not an insignificant impact on employers' costs. 4 to 5, 6% is not something you can generally take on board without some consideration, forecasting, and budgeting. Salary sacrifice agreements need to be reviewed to ensure they remain compliant. This is one of the major areas. Salary sacrifices are fantastic things, particularly in relation to pensions, but they cannot, under any circumstances, take an employee below the national minimum wage. So as the national minimum wage rises, then salary sacrifice agreements become more likely, it becomes more likely they will fail to comply. So it always needs to be considered in relation to any salary sacrifice situation. When those pay rates come along, the national minimum wage increases, then any salary sacrifices in operation need to be reviewed to make sure that no one is falling foul. We're always looking at the national minimum wage. We're always looking at whether salary sacrifice pensions will take employees below that. So we endeavour to flag that up, but the responsibility is certainly also lies with the employer. So with two sets of eyes looking at it, it becomes far less likely that it's ever going to be a problem. But it is, if we go back, it took a long time to decide whether actually salary sacrifices had any place in the national minimum wage thinking, because people were getting something in a different way. But it is clear, has been for a good number of years now, that you cannot sacrifice salary that takes you below the national minimum wage. So when someone wants to put 100% in their pension, I'm afraid it can't be done, not by a salary sacrifice at least. So that's that. Impact on employment costs. So I thought it would be useful, having gone through the exercise last year when it was a bit more frightening. We looked at a couple of examples of an employee aged 22 over 22 on 37.5 hours a week, paid wage, and using national insurance letter A, which is people aged over 21. So if you're aged under 21, it changes slightly. The general principle doesn't, but it's important that we apply the same logic to all. So in 2024-25, going back that far, if you were paying an employee on those criteria, national minimum wage, which at the time then was £11.44, together with national insurance, their annual salary bill, the employer's cost would be £24,131. The changes last year, which were significant, changes in NI rates, changes in NI thresholds, significant increases in national minimum wage. So last year, that employee rose from £24,131 to £26,630. Not insignificant in any shape or form. It meant that you as an employer for that employee had an additional cost to your business of £2,500. Comparing March with April, which was pretty frightening, 10.4% increase. And it was one of those slow burners that, it's the fallout is still now being felt. If you listen to the hospitality industry or, retail or wherever, lots of, bad things have happened because that sneaky little change that was too complicated to see day one really had a massive impact. 26-27, not as bad, but still not insignificant. There is the the same employee will now go up to £27,752, which is an annual increase. So an increase in April on, so April 26 versus what you'll pay in March 26, £1,100, just over 4.2% increase. So depending where you are, how successful your business, how things are looking, 4.2% could be big, could be small, but it's yeah, it's I think in relation to inflation and other things, it's significant. In comparison, we also took a look at an employee who was again aged over 22, working 37.5 hours a week, but he or she was on £30,000 per annum. Again, NI letter A for the ease of calculation as much as anything else. So last year we saw an increase there as well. That was an increase that was all about the rates and thresholds. So there was no necessity to increase their pay to bring them above a prescribed minimum wage. Whether there was pressure from below to push that up is a different question entirely. But if you, as a business, didn't increase their pay, just did what you had to do, kept their pay the same, they were still costing you an additional £864 in 25-26 versus 24-25. So they were costing you extra money last year as well. This year, because there are no changes to rates and thresholds of national insurance, there is no change to their pay. Again, with the caveat that if their mate who is on the national minimum wage is getting an £1,100 a year increase, then one suspects pressure would be on to award something to that employee, but it's not forced upon you. It's a commercial business decision. There are also additional employer costs, notably holiday pay and pension contributions. So those are just the additional what it costs you based on their pay and the national insurance. So that was a useful comparison. Statutory payments. I've really put it here for the sake of completeness. In terms of parental pays of one type or another, they're all listed there. There are more than there used to be, but they're all rising from £187.18 per week to £194.32 a week. Lower earnings limit, which is the limit, it is the threshold above which you start to receive certain benefits, including parental pay, statutory parental pay. So that is moving up from £125 to £129 per week. These are all weekly figures. The interesting one at the bottom, statutory sick pay. That is moving from £118.75 a week to £123.25 a week. But there's a sneaky little asterisk there. So this is definitely not budget 2025, but it is something that is coming into being in April 2026. And that is the change to SSP. Very significant changes, which we'll go on to on a slide in a moment. So yeah, in fact, we'll go on to that slide now, I think. So statutory, God, can't get me S's and me P's out today. Statutory sick pay. So lots of changes there. Lower earnings limit is being removed. So previously, we just referred to them on the previous slide. If average weekly earnings were below £125 per week, an employee would not receive SSP. Long and convoluted calculations sometimes, but that was it. So in essence, if their pay was not at a required level, they could not receive statutory sick pay. However, from April 2026, statutory pay will be available to all employees, regardless of their earnings. So a big change. SSP will be paid at statutory rate or 80% of average weekly earnings, whichever is lower. So whichever is lower is very important. I've heard some scaremongery type webinars and things that were talking about 80% of a daily rate. And if you were on, £300 a day, that sounded like a lot of money. It is not a daily rate. It cannot be more than the SSP rate. So don't scare yourself silly with that one. It's whichever is lower, not whichever is higher. There will be transitional protection for employees on SSP before the 6th of April and who are still off sick, because for those employees, moving onto the new method of calculation would have disadvantaged them. So I think getting up to about £150 a week, if your average weekly earnings were 153-ish, I think. I should have put it on the slide, but didn't. But it only applies to people who are straddling that 6th of April in the same period of sickness or a linked period of sickness. But the transitional rate is to protect them so that people are not suffering through implementation of the new methods of calculation. Waiting days are removed. So probably the most significant, I would suggest, but you will have a judgment about that as employers. Employees paid for all absence days. So we see an awful lot of days, odd days that are off sick, where an employer may say pay SSP if applicable. And we'll happily go back and say no SSP payable, no PIW has been formed, period of incapacity for work has been formed. So you haven't got to worry about it. Well, now you have got to worry about it. If an employee's off for a full day, they will be eligible for SSP, provided they are, of course, sick. So the necessity for determining whether an employee is sick or absent for other reasons becomes more important. Didn't matter so much, if it was an odd day, didn't matter what you called it, you deducted it from their pay probably, and you weren't going to pay them anything, so it's no biggie. Now it is a biggie. Maintaining those records is far more important. Capacity for work will be 1 day, obviously, if you're dealing in days. Not so obviously will be what is the qualifying day. We still have the same issues around qualifying days. 5-day worker, Monday to Friday will be their qualifying days, no problem at all. A worker who works 3 days 1 week, 2 days next week, when asked the question, those days are variable days, then the qualifying day that is chosen is important, will determine the amount that is paid. And that will continue to be a question we will ask when we need to. But yeah, SSP is going to be payable for ad hoc absences, those odd days off previously, took it on the chin, planned your business around it, and safe in the knowledge they weren't being paid. Now they are going to be paid a rate, not the rate they would get for a normal day's work, but a rate. So on to the next slide. So now we've got a poll. This is first time we've tried this. So Tracy's going to manage this in the background. So quite how this works, because I probably can't see it. So we've got a poll. Just trying to establish what type or types of sick pay do you currently offer? Because I think the relationship here, SSP is clear cut. The rules are changing. People have occupational sick pay of one type or another. And you also need to review your policies in relation to that occupational sick pay. That's right, I'm talking as you're ticking your boxes. Because very often a contract of employment will possibly refer to waiting days. Well, there are no waiting days anymore, so that may need changing. We see lots of companies who don't pay occupational sick pay for the first 3 days in line with SSP. Again, that may be something that you have changed, will change, want to change, or need to ensure that your contracts reflect what you're actually doing, because making reference to SSP rules that are no longer may make life more complicated if you ever need to go back. So the quick poll. I'll wait for Tracy to say so on whether we've had lots of responses in. Oh, there we go. So what type of employee sick pay do you offer? A statutory sick pay only. So if you only offer statutory sick pay, then there's 100% chance that your costs are going to increase because you would, well, I say 100%, let's give it 98% just in case. In all likelihood, you will have employees who have had odd days off where they have actually been sick and could have self-certified as being sick because they don't need a fit note, again, depending on internal policies, etc. And now you're going to be paying them 80% of their average weekly earnings or a rate of pay, SSP, for the day that they were absent. So you weren't paying them anything, now you are. So an increase in cost. Occupational sick pay. If you're paying occupational sick pay, then very often that the SSP is kind of sitting in the background, only becomes pertinent or relevant when an employee gets to the 28-week limit or gets to the limit of your occupational sick pay. So you might have 6 weeks at full pay, 6 weeks at half pay. When they get to week 12, that's when SSP rears its ugly head and you then have to bear it in mind. But it's unlikely to have a huge upward impact on your cost. Both types, employee dependent. So yeah, again, highly likely there'll be an increase. And if you don't know, then I've got no way of knowing what impact it will have. But yeah, generally speaking, the changes are going to have some impact on cost. I mean, I think the government was referring to 1.3 million employees being paid SSP who wouldn't previously have been paid it. So 1.3 million employees at, will be at £100, 20, £25 a day, whatever, is not insignificant amounts of money. So yeah. So thank you very much for your participation in that one. Got another one later on. The fact it worked once gives me absolute confidence it will work again in a moment. So we can move on to the next slide. Benefits. Benefits as a whole. And the one thing that I think I didn't come out of the budget because it came out weeks before what they were up to. But certainly it was the headline grabber of a fairly dull budget in payroll terms. I'm sure it was very exciting elsewhere. But the change to, or the restriction of, salary sacrifice pension benefits. So I've got a brief overview of that here. What is changing? So the change doesn't happen till April 2029. That's 3 years away. Whatever you think might happen, might not happen. There's plenty of time to plan for the change. Lots of things have been going to happen, and we've had a few U-turns recently, so who knows. The aspects of actually managing it, I think it's definitely one of those where they pitched the idea, and when asked the question, how are you going to do it, there isn't an answer. The question, if someone changes jobs, what happens? How do we know what they're carrying from one job to the other? Is this going to be applied, on a month-by-month basis, or on an annual basis once you get to a point? Who knows? So we know it's going to change. The change that we do know, the little detail we do have, is only the first £2,000 of employee pension contributions through salary sacrifice will be exempt from national insurance. So what does that mean? So if we just look at, I'll look at the changes and then I'll look at why we offer salary sacrifice in the first place. Estimates suggest 1/3 of private sector employees will be affected. I don't know whose estimate that is. I've seen it touted a couple of times. It certainly wouldn't apply in the businesses we deal with. It would be way lower than that. But some employees will undoubtedly be affected, I think it's fair to say. Employees and employers will lose out on the NI savings currently enjoyed. So if there are employees who are effective, then there will be an employer's cost to the whole thing. Why we're offering salary sacrifice? Why is salary sacrifice a great idea in relation to pensions? Why, for the last good number of years, have we talked positively about salary sacrifice in relation to pensions? plain and simple, a salary sacrifice, you're giving up part of your salary or your basic pay in exchange for an employer benefit, in this case, additional employer pension contribution. In so doing, you make a saving on national insurance because that part of your pay is no longer part of your gross pay. Your gross pay is reduced. So for employees earning up to £50,000 a year, that is an 8% national insurance saving for the employee. Going back 18 months, 2 years, it was 12% or 12%. So it's come down because in the attempts to reduce taxes for the working population, then that the effect for employees has become less, but for employers, and sorry, just to finish that, 2% for those earning more, so above approximately £50,000 a year, employees' national insurance reduces to 2%. Employers doesn't. So NI savings for employers are 15% with no upper limit. So at the moment, anyone contributing through salary sacrifice, as an employer, you make a saving of 15% on that salary sacrifice value against where you would be without the salary sacrifice value. What you do with the 15% varies. Some people plow it into their employees' pensions. Some people retain it within the business. That's entirely up to the businesses concerned. But ultimately, the change will mean that anyone who is contributing more than £2,000 a year through salary sacrifice, there will be some form of cost to the business. The 15% they're currently, their bill is currently reducing by, will not reduce by. So very often, end of year bonuses are quite popular. Instead of having a bonus, people will contribute to a pension in form of salary sacrifice. And that very often would take them above the £2,000, meaning that the employer, part of the benefit in allowing that is that it gets paid for because the admin and the admin behind allowing the employee to do that is dealt with because you're making a saving. If that saving is not being made, you may need to look at it differently potentially. Salary sacrifice also is a matter of convenience for some. Higher rate taxpayers get immediate tax relief at their marginal rate, so they don't have to fill in a tax return or claim additional tax relief in other ways. It happens automatically. So there is a convenience factor to salary sacrifice too for some employees. Next slide, please. Impact on employees. So certainly if we look at across the employers and employees we deal with, then the loss in NI savings for employees, bearing in mind they're still going to get it on the £2,000, the loss in savings for employees is highly unlikely, I would suggest, going to change anyone's behaviour. Any employees not going to want to come out of a salary sacrifice simply because they're no longer making that saving, because they'll still be making some saving. It's just not as big. There are other incentives to save into a pension that are still in place to ensure a comfortable existence in retirement. Excellent idea. I like it. Tax-free lump sum, 25% of pot up to £268,275. So those are still benefits of saving into a pension, even if you're not saving national insurance. Salary sacrifice is convenient for tax planning. So if you can afford to make additional contributions at specific points in your, in your year, then it can give you tax planning advantages. So if you plan your tax, you might decide at the end of the year, rather than tip into a higher rate of tax, I'm going to put some in my pension. Perfectly acceptable, may be impacted. Other people may use salary sacrifice to reduce their taxable pay for perhaps other reasons, to lower their marginal rate of tax so that they pay tax at 20% instead of 40 or 45% would be a perfectly reasonable reason to do it, to keep the annual tax-free allowance, or to retain benefit of free childcare or child benefits. By having a lower income, you are eligible for certain benefits. If you sacrifice part of your salary, you are reducing your income and therefore maintaining perhaps your eligibility for certain childcare and child benefits. So there are other reasons for doing it, but there may be a negative impact for some. Impact for employers. So just to give some numbers, whether you think they're big, small, it's all in the eye of the beholder, really. So if an employee earns £50,000 and contributes 5%, just working through the numbers, they're making a 5% contribution. So their contribution is £2,500 per year, spread probably over 12 months. Their NI saving the employer's NI saving through allowing that employee to salary sacrifice is £375 currently, and will be up until April 2029. Come April 2029, that NI saving will be capped. So it'll be capped at £2,000. The NI saving will therefore be £300. And the net cost of the change to you, the employer, will be £75 per annum per employee. So depending how many employees you have, will depend how significant that is. If employee earns £100,000 and contributes 5%, then their contribution is obviously double, £5,000, as is your NI saving currently, £5,000. The NI saving will now be capped at £300, so the cost to you, the business, of that change will be £450 per annum for that employee. So there is an impact. So in advance of the changes, it's important that we assess current savings through employers' national insurance and determine the cost of those changes. As I say, in most cases, you can look and you can find it won't be too difficult to see where you stand. But there will be some businesses for whom there are potentially significant considerations. You need to compare the NI costs on contributions above the cap with the savings up to the £2,000 threshold. So I think it's fair to say that it's unlikely you would cease any plans to implement a salary sacrifice pension arrangement or reverse ones you already have. But you still need to look at it. Very unlikely you'd move away from salary sacrifice on the basis of the numbers we have looking at all our employers and their employees. And you do have 3 years to analyse, plan and implement any changes. So it's not something you need to deal with now, but you do need to deal with it at some point. And there will be more detail on this over coming months. There are still lots of questions. So we better move on to the next slide. Time's moving on and I'm not moving on at a sufficient pace. Luckily, we're on to some really boring stuff now, so I will spin through these very quickly. So employee car ownership schemes and EV changes. I don't think we've got any employers with ecos. So I don't think we have. That is when you transfer the ownership of the vehicle to the employee. It looks a bit like something HMRC would like to charge some national insurance on, but they've delayed the plans to do that. So it's now been kicked into the long grass in 2030. So we don't need to worry about that. Electric and hybrid vehicles. Again, if you've got an electric or a hybrid vehicle, you will have seen that you will be paying 3p per mile and 1.5p per mile come April 2028, plus your vehicle excise duty. No one knows exactly how the government is going to monitor this. Is it going to be a self-service? A bit like the old days when you make a mileage claim. How many miles did I do again? Without Google Maps, very hard to tell. I'll tell you what, I'll put down 300. The talk of going into MOT stations and getting it and all the rest of it. It's one of these, they've flown it out there. They got until 2028 to work it out. And I'm sure they will. So a consultation is underway. Yeah, excellent. We'll know about consultations. Company cars and vans. So these are things that have been out there for a number of years now. They've been putting the benefit charges out in advance to allow businesses to plan long term. Zero emission and electric vehicles increasing by 2% each year, rising to 9% by 2930. Cars with emissions between 1 and 50 grams of CO2 per kilometre will rise, and there are the figures there. Van benefit charges are there as well. They've risen by the Consumer Price Index. about 1.7%. So those figures are there. We see as more vans probably than cars these days. So that's that slide done and dusted. I have up to my pace now, I'm afraid. Working from home. So the government will remove the deduction from income tax for non-reimbursed home working expenses. So as employers, you can still reimburse home working expenses. So many people will pay £26 a month or the equivalent weekly amount to people who work at home because it can be paid free of income tax and national insurance. However, during COVID, employees were encouraged to let HMRC know they were working from home and they would get their tax code adjusted to take that into account. That will no longer be happening. So it can't be done that way anymore. So if you've encouraged employees to do that in the past, then they may come back to you and say, I can't do it anymore, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I'm not in control of policy. So employer provided benefits. So there's now an exemption for employer provided benefits. It will now cover eye tests, home working equipment, and flu vaccinations. And it's really a technical thing. They're all things that you should be able to get without deduction of tax and national insurance. But because predominantly those things were procured by the employees, it was more difficult to deal with it. So that makes it easy to deal with. So that's that. Payroll and benefits. Oh, we got another poll here. It will be a real quick poll, this one. But just quickly, plans for the mandatory payroll and benefits from April 2027 were confirmed. Bearing in mind, this time last year, the plans for the mandatory payroll and benefits from April 2026 were confirmed too. So hopefully it will happen. Well, I say hopefully. I think it will happen this time. The things they couldn't deal with, which is employment-related loans and accommodation, are going to be dealt with by a mini P11D. No one knows what one of those is yet, but again, it will eventually come out. There is a poll now on your screens, which this is more for our internal kind of understanding what people do. We know what we do. We have a good guess of what other people are doing in terms of how P11Ds are dealt with, but just want to see whether my iceberg with the majority below the water is actually true, or whether we've actually captured most of it. Class 1A national insurance NIC liabilities to be paid monthly. So there is a big change. We all expected it to happen. Currently, Class 1A national insurance is payable at the end or after the end of the tax year on the 22nd of July. Now it will be collected monthly because now it's payrolled. HMRC will know what it is. They'll know the liabilities, so they can take it off you straight away. There's the quick poll results in. So excellent. 35% already have us dealing with it. Thank you very much. It's really appreciated. Dealt with by staff internally. So that will need to change by 2027 because it will need to be submitted by your payroll bureau. So we will we will go out. We started the process of contacting people and then it was shelved for a year, but we will embark on that journey once again shortly. Dealt with by your accountant. So again, it will need to be done by us, or more correctly, the payroll and your P11Ds will need to be done by the same people. I would hope it would be us, but it might not be. So no benefits to report. Okay, so thank you very much for your participation in that. 2 successful polls. I'm very excited by that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? We've done that. Yay. Apprenticeship levy. Suffice to say, the apprenticeship levy is transitioning into the growth and skills levy. So they're changing the name. They're doing a few different things. Some of the co-investment is changing. Restrictions on level 7 funding. 10% top up removed from employers who use their own contributions. Funds expire faster. So they used to sit in your levy account for 24 months. They will then now sit in there for 12 months. And higher co-investment once levy funds are used, employers will need to contribute. So yeah, it's basically a move towards cheaper forms of training for younger workers, I think it's fair to say, would be a summary. So we'll skip through that one. That's the content done. Now, oh yeah, 10:59. I did have to accelerate towards the end, to be fair. And I'm hoping accelerating towards the end is something I will be doing with this. So this is just a quick one. I think it's really cheeky, but I've never been cheeky before. So literally, I'm unashamedly letting you as people who support us, letting you know that Bella and I are running the London Landmarks Half Marathon in April of this year. We're supporting one of our charity clients, Lepra. We have a lot of charity clients, absolutely no reason not to support others, but we can only do one half marathon. We might not even be able to do that. So it's just, I've got a QR code on there. It'll probably skip by a bit quick to get it, but I will send it out on an email afterwards. If you found today's presentation useful and are able to make a donation, we really would appreciate it. Absolutely no obligation. As I say, I think it's a bit cheeky, but being not a social media type guy, it's the only route I have. So I thought I would ask. We tried to support a charity last year through paid webinars, and that didn't really work out. So trying a different route this time. So thank you very much in anticipation. A little bit about lepra there. Leprosy is not a disease of the past. It still exists, but it is curable. When I went to Sunday school, we used to talk about leper colonies and such like, and it's sad to think that these days there are still people suffering who shouldn't be. So yeah, if you can support us in any way at all, then we really would appreciate it. On to the next slide. Begging over. Upcoming webinars. So we won't do any more begging this year. We've got a couple of upcoming webinars, which are kind of driven by queries that we've had. Certainly the first one is, and the second one is driven by functionality that's been driven by comments we've had. So on the 10th of February, we're going to run a webinar on holiday pay. It won't be as dull as the budget. In fact, it's far too exciting, which is why we've held off so long. Holiday pay is, in my opinion, the single most complicated thing that we deal with as payroll professionals and as businesses. Everyone does their best to comply with the legislation. The legislation was updated, or guidelines were updated a couple of years ago. Didn't deal with any of the problems we have. It dealt with 0 hours workers, but if you work 10 hours, if you're contracted to work 10 hours and work 30 hours, what happens with your holiday pay? How much are you going to be paid, etc. So we're biting the bullet and going to do a webinar on that, which I think is going to be one of our best. You may be comparing it with this one, in which case, how could it be any worse? You might be saying, but anyway. So holiday pay, really appreciate it. February the 10th, if you could attend, that would be great. We're making it 2 hours this time. So I won't be in a rush at the end, although I probably will, because that's more about me than the content, I think. And then employer portal, discovering new features. So the brain portal that you all use, or most of you use for day-to-day, there is new functionality. It's been driven by users. We've played a big part in the development of new functionality. Yeah, we've been an early adopter of Brain. It's massively improved in the time we've had it. It's much better than what we used to use, but it's constantly improving, and that's about helping you to learn about the new features that will be available or are available or may be available to some, because I know it's there, it's available in our test company, but we haven't rolled it out, I don't think. So March the 4th is a great day for that. We're allowing an hour for that, but I'm happy to say, for your sake, that it probably won't be me presenting. It'll be either Tracy or Daniel or Megan or a combination of them all. So yeah, next slide, please, which I think is a thank you. So thank you very, very much for putting up with me for an hour, if you have done. If you haven't, I can't thank you because you're no longer there. But yeah, we appreciate your time. We know that you've busy people Monday mornings. We try to impart as much information as we can in a fairly short period of time. It is difficult. There are so many nuances to everything that we look at here.